The other week, one of my favorite creators, Hannah Witton, made a video about her gender, and I thought it was really important. The video was called "Cis People Should Think About Their Gender Too," and I think the reason it spoke to me so much is because I'm often having gendered thoughts, recognizing those as gendered thoughts, and then just kind of saying, oh, and letting that go. That's about the extent to which I'll think about it. For example, if I make an assumption about someone's gender upon meeting them, I'll register that I'm doing it because I'm trying to be better about not necessarily doing that, but that's where the thought stops, and then the rest of life sort of all falls to the forefront of my mind and I forget about it. But this video was really cool because it was inspired by Heather Flowers' tweet thread questioning gender for everyone, including cis people. People usually use cisgender in relation to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender corresponds with their biological sex or the sex that they were assigned at birth. I've always identified as cis just sort of by default. I've never thought about it. I've never had to think about it. And that was Heather's whole point. Cis people don't take the time to think about these things. We're always thinking of gender expansive folks as the other. And that's kind of strange because the more that we learn about gender and the more statistics come out that people are thinking about gender in a more fluid way, the more we should really all be considering it. So seeing Hannah's video was super exciting, and I thought that I would make my own. A lot of our answers actually do line up, but some are different. And I would just encourage you to sit down with these questions too when you have the chance. And if you have any sort of big revelation, like Heather says, reach out. Ask questions and ask for help and find out who you are. I'll also link a lot of really awesome trans creators in the description below because even though this conversation is really important and cisgender people should be considering the way that gender impacts our everyday life, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a conversation that we need to own. So go into the description as soon as this video is over and check out some really awesome people. So the first question is, what do I enjoy about being my gender? And immediately my head went to, well, a lot of what I enjoy is tied in with expectations. And we get into expectation questions later, but I have things written down like skincare, the fact that I get to partake in like luxurious skincare and have that be a form of self-care without feeling weird about it or feeling like I could be judged about it. The flip side of that is that it sort of is more expected of me. Same goes for things like makeup. I do really genuinely enjoy it, but at the same time, I often feel like I have to sort of have a base amount on my face in order to not look tired, and men don't have to do that. Part of what makes it interesting too is when you're someone I'm definitely not the most versed person in gender and sexuality, but I'm learning a lot. And so I also know that you don't have to identify as a woman in order to really, really love these things. And I honestly think that more people who identify as men need to take better care of their skin. But a lot of what I perceive as connected to my gender may or may not be. There's also a cost associated with all of these things. We've got pink taxes on everything. The skincare and the makeup and the clothes and the everything else that is expected can be hard to maneuver, especially if you're trying to get into more of a professional environment, which I want to make an entire video about professionalism and the barriers to entry to that idea. Something I definitely would not have had the opportunity to take part in, though, that I did, was I went to an all-girls high school, and I could give you an entire list of ways that was harmful and traumatic and things that I dealt with there. But at the same time, some of the best friendships I ever got to experience happened there, and women's friendships are incredible. And I think to a certain extent, people who identify as guys don't get the opportunity to get as close all the time. Getting to be friends with women because of the way that women are often able to trust other women has been so impactful. And I love my guy friends so much, but there's just a level of vulnerability that a lot of my women friends are able to be with me that honestly my NB and women friends are able to be more vulnerable with me than I think any of my male friends have ever been. And that might be something I might be like giving off a vibe of not wanting that or something, but I also think that there's a certain extent to which men don't allow themselves that opportunity as often as women do because they're taught not to do so. And so I think that there's something really beautiful about women's friendships that I think could really benefit a lot of guys' friendships. Women's spaces are often really amazing and somewhere that can feel really powerful. And I love how many of these spaces are becoming more inclusive of non-binary identity, and it's just cool to like be one of the identities that gets to really take part in that. And so that's something that I really love about my gender. I think that there are really awesome role models in almost any gender, but I love a lot of people who I believe identify as cis women, and am really excited that I get to sort of look up to them. People like Loretta Ross and AOC and Elizabeth Warren are those who are coming to mind right now. I also think that's why I've been so invested in making films about how platforms can keep different identities from being represented, because that representation is so important and it's really impactful. I have no idea if the camera is picking up the train sound or not, but it's real bad right now. Take a Baby Yoda break. This is more of a privilege than something that I like, but since I identify as bisexual, there's just a difference being a woman, a cis woman, and identifying that way. I might get sexualized, but I am less likely to get outright attacked for it. People may think I'm faking or wanting attention, but I think cis guys who are bi just have a harder time being taken seriously. And I believe they're often more likely to experience violence, so that's just a way that my gender actually acts as a privilege as it relates to my sexuality. Why do I identify with my gender? So I want to acknowledge that sex and gender are different. For the longest time though, and still, I am acutely aware of my body, particularly being like a mid-size or plus-size person. I've always been aware of my body. As soon as I hit puberty, older men were making disgusting comments towards me, and I was just really aware of it. And so even though I know that sex and gender they don't always line up with each other, for me, they were always really intertwined, and I didn't really have the option for that, or I didn't feel like I really had the option for that. And I think because of the correlation that I have, I never really tried to separate the two for me. An example of this that I have is I cut my hair really, really short when I went and worked in Australia for a summer, and I found myself always wanting to wear earrings, like dangly earrings, because I wanted to come across as feminine. And if I was in a smaller body, I don't know if I would worry so much about coming across as feminine in that way. So I feel like I've always wanted to portray myself as more feminine. Even when I was in like my emo punk phase, I wanted to be the girl version of that, you know? Like I never felt like that wasn't something that I connected to. And what's hard is that when you're someone that's so aware of your body for negative reasons, because of mostly outside forces, it makes it really hard to like disconnect gender from your body. Even if I'm able to do that for other people, it's really difficult for me to think about doing that for myself. I don't know if any of that made sense, but I guess I identify with my gender because it's never felt incorrect or mildly off. What gendered expectations do I put on myself, and do I enjoy those? So I was just kind of talking about body image, and I really think that my body image would be completely different if I was a guy. A lot of the time, and it's not that men don't feel self-conscious, I know for sure that they often do. There's more space for men to be like funny or really smart or something else, whereas the expectation for women is to be physically attractive. And I'm still working on not putting that external physical appearance expectation on myself. You know, when I put on makeup, a lot of the time it's for me, it's because it's fun, but I doubt that it's that way all the time. And so that's a gendered expectation in my mind. I think a lot of my desire to be really active and fit comes from a desire to be happy and healthy, and I feel the endorphins, and I know how good fitness makes me feel a lot of the time, but I also think that a lot of the feelings of convincing myself to do it, even when I genuinely don't feel like it, comes out of that negative body image that I'm still working on. And I just don't know if I would feel the same way if I was a man or if I identified as non-binary. I'm sure that there's a whole list of different kinds of concerns around body image for men and for non-binary folk. I also have sort of an opposite gendered expectation where my partner, who is a cis man, has a full-time job. That's a really awesome job, and I'm really proud of him for getting it. And I'm running my own business, but it's not nearly at the level of, like, income-wise what he has. And so I'm very aware of the stereotypes of, like, being a housewife or just being the not the breadwinner, I guess, in the family, or not contributing as much. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But that's not what I ever envisioned for myself. And so that's like a gendered expectation that I'm aware of, that I'm not necessarily putting on myself, but that I'm almost scared of, even though no one else is bugging me about that. That's just something that in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, well, it would be really cool if I was like contributing in the same way when it's not necessary. What gendered expectations do I put on others? So I mentioned this briefly in the beginning, and I do still assume people's gender based on the way that they are presenting and the way that I have been socialized to put people in a box of, like, this is a man, this is a woman, when they're just like walking up to me out of the blue, or if I'm getting introduced to them at a party or something. And that's something that I am still working on, and introducing myself as a cis woman, so using my pronouns when I introduce myself to people, that's something I'm still getting used to. And I think the more that we do it, the easier it'll be for me to sort of internalize that you don't know until someone tells you. Tony's also still the one that kills bugs for the most part. Like, there was a thick brown fuzzy spider under the umbrella outside today, and I told him, I was like, I'm not closing that. If you would like to close it, you're welcome to. I'm not doing it. And I think for me, that is definitely a gendered thing, because when I was living by myself in Estonia, I was killing all of the bugs and it was fine. But now that I have him, I can sort of ask him to do it. And yeah, that's definitely a gendered expectation that I still have, and that I should get over, because there will come a time when I don't have him to kill the scary, thick spider. Not looking forward to that day. He also handles a lot of the transactions that we have as a family unit with men. So contractors, like arguments at stores, arguments on the phone. I often let him do that because I have experienced sexism in those circumstances, and half the time I don't want to risk us potentially not getting what we need because of my womanhood. Like, I don't want me being the one that tried to make that argument to be the reason why we didn't get a discount on something that we deserved or something. So that's another gendered expectation that I put on him. How do social pressures affect my gender presentation? So I've already talked about things like skincare and makeup and wanting to look professional, and I think that oftentimes women have to wear a wider variety of things. And the benefit of that is that we do have more options, or we tend to have more options. Femme people and people who present themselves to the world in a more feminine way usually have more opportunities for creativity and things like that. And that definitely does affect me. You'll see some videos that I have planned of different closet cleanouts and putting together professional wardrobes where I'm shopping my own closet. And a lot of that content is available to me in large part because I'm a woman. I also think that in addition to trying to present as more feminine for the benefit of the people around me, I am very aware of how much space I take up when I'm doing anything, or like the way that I'm reacting to things, the way that I'm talking to people, whether or not I'm making eye contact, if I'm like playing with my hair or like twiddling my thumbs. It's all something that I'm more aware of, I think, possibly because I'm a woman, because I'm very conscious of the way that I'm coming across to people because of that desire to be taken seriously and to be heard and listened to. I think that affects my gender presentation, because it's more than just putting something on for comfort. It's how is wearing this thing, or whether or not I decide to put on foundation for the day, going to impact every conversation I have for the rest of the day. And I think sometimes that is overthinking. I'm hoping that that isn't true and that a lot of that is in my head. But I also know objectively from experience that sometimes if people don't think that you're pretty, they won't listen to you. And that's frustrating. And it definitely is something I think about often. And it's not everyone, obviously, but it is something that I'm aware of. In what ways could I better feed my gender? What small things could I do to make it happy? Like Hannah, I think that the way that this is written is very cute, and it makes something like gender that can come across as pretty daunting less intimidating and more of like a fun thing, like a fun addition to your identity, and not this law that you're beholden to, which is nice because that isn't what gender is. I think doing small things on a daily basis, like asking if the extra effort is actually necessary for that day, will feed my gender, because I will feel more like myself when I give myself that grace. I used to do a lot more colorful eyeshadow, and I think the benefit of doing things like that, like really sitting with your own face and experiencing that creativity with what you've been given, is cool. And it's something that I haven't done as much. And as someone who identifies as a woman, I get to do that without fear of being mocked or even really being stared at for too long. And I think that that is a huge privilege, and it's one that I may try to let myself partake in a little bit more, just to see if it actually is still for me. And I think something that would really feed my gender well would be thinking about this more often, you know, maybe every 6 months or every year, and sitting with it again and thinking, okay, well, is this still the way that I want to be presenting? If that's still enough, or if it's starting to become too much, I think will really feed it well. I also think that something that will feed my gender really well, because you definitely don't need to be a woman to be able to have a baby. You don't need to identify that way. And not all women can have babies, but I often feel sort of silly when I talk with either Tony or with my friends about wanting to try for a kid somewhat soon, and like seeing that in my future. Like, it's almost because I'm also someone that is very career oriented. Like, women often get told that you either have to choose one or the other, or you're gonna do a really shit job at both. And I don't think that that's true, but it makes me feel like, ugh, every time I talk about it, like, ugh, you know, like there's some sort of tension there, where even when I do let myself feel excited about that prospect, there's something in the back of my mind going, but Tony doesn't have to worry about this, or like he won't get fired or have to worry about keeping work or any of these other things. And I think allowing myself to acknowledge those things but still feel excited at that idea, especially after getting the dogs and like feeling like a mom to them. And I know it's different. Letting myself really imagine that without feeling guilty about it, I think would feel good. And then something like just acknowledging that the person that I've chosen to spend the rest of my life with is going to be a really awesome teammate in that, and I don't really have to worry about it so much, will help. And I don't know what the mental block is there of thinking that it's still all going to fall on me, because I know objectively that it's not, but there's something in my brain that tells me that because I identify as a woman, like, it's gonna be more on me. And I mean, that's one of those things where I'm not gonna really know until we're in it, but I trust him to not let me feel that way. And so I think reminding myself of that too will be helpful. How do I visualize gender as a concept, and what does my gender look like? For a really long time, and I think this is still how it often gets drawn, for a really long time I viewed gender as a spectrum, because I was thinking, okay, so you're a man, a woman, or you're non-binary, or you're fluid and you're fluctuating, and that was sort of it. Like I thought those were the options. And Hannah talks about it as a solar system, which I think is really beautiful. I am reluctant to, again, put it in the verbiage of like a body, but if you can think of very non-specific organs that are kind of ever breathing and moving around each other and sort of hovering around other organs that are exciting to them. Like for some reason that's where my brain goes. One giant body with a bunch of different organs that take up different jobs and ebb and flow and breathe and fluctuate and like work together and then move apart when they want to. Like for some reason, when I think of gender and I visualize it, it is ever moving. And so I think of an organ. And it's not like a heart or a liver or anything like that. It's just like these blobby things that are like going like this and like moving around. I don't know. I guess I could also think of it as like a bunch of different animals coexisting. The problem with that idea is that I think a lot of animals, at least in my brain, do get gendered. Like the fox, for example, I almost always think of a fox as like a very feminine animal. But if I was able to like remove that and think of gender as like a bunch of different animals and how we're still discovering more and how exciting that is, like that also feels really good. So I don't know. What does my gender look like? And I just keep picturing a bear with a bow on its head. I don't know why. I just keep seeing a bear with a bow on its head. And like this is after I thought about it for a while too. Like it was my first thought, but then I kept sitting with it and really trying to think about it, and I couldn't get away from that image. And it's like, it's a cute bear. It's like a fuzzy brown bear. And then there's just like a bow on its head, which is like a very feminine thing. Maybe to me that has a lot to do with the presentation of my gender. I don't necessarily want to be all dolled up all the time. And sometimes I like feel like a bear, not all the way put together, but still adorable. And then like the bow is just like the one thing maybe I'll do on a day when I really don't feel like it, just to still look like I made somewhat of an effort. And sometimes that is genuinely more for me than for anybody else. And so yeah, my gender is a bear with a bow on its head. Those were all of the questions. I would love it so much if you would partake in this video. When you scroll through this tweet thread, a lot of people did discover with this reflection that they didn't identify the way that they had always thought that they did. So do be mentally prepared for that. Have a system set up, someone to call. I do think this is a really awesome exercise to take part in, especially if you're someone that has always identified as cisgender, because this isn't something that we are made to think about very often. It's something that we take for granted, and I think it's been really helpful and cool to think about, and I think it has given me a better understanding of how to process the assumptions that I make in life and the things that I put on myself unnecessarily. Tag me in the videos if you make them. Yeah, and I will see you soon.